In this video, I'm going to show you 4 deceptions that will keep you from fighting and 4 things that will get you victory through your trials. Hello everybody, this is Pastor Lyle and welcome to Daily Renewal. If this is your first time tuning in with us, I just want to encourage you to consider becoming a subscriber to our channel. If this content is beneficial to you, I also want to encourage you to share it with as many people as you can. That helps our channel get out to more people and in turn, of course, help more people. Also, by becoming a subscriber, you will have access to over 200 different episodes of Daily Renewal that are all designed to help you in your Christian walk. I want to begin today by talking about one of the most controversial sports teams in history. You know, there's been lots of teams in history that have been accused of foul play or cheating. But one of the great teams is the New England Patriots. You know, there's some people, when you mention that team, they just cringe and get mad. And a lot of it has to do with the fact that they definitely are a great, or were a great football team. But the thing that often bothers people about the New England Patriots is that they have been caught cheating a few times. You know, we can go back to the Deflategate scandal, but specifically, there's something that lines up with what I want to talk to you about today, and we bring it back to 2002 when they faced the Rams in the Super Bowl. There was a couple players off the Rams that said, you know what, we ran plays that there's no way they could have known about, and yet they seemed to have the perfect defense for right at the time when we ran it. And then a few years later in 2004, they faced the Steelers in the AFC title, I believe it was, for the AFC title. And again, there was players that said there's no way they could have known those plays. You know, they'd set up special plays for that game, and yet once again, the Patriots seemed to have the exact play to counter their plays. And then in 2007, it was revealed in what is often known as the Spygate. And that was when the Patriots were caught recording practice sessions of the New York Jets. And as a result, there was big fines. They lost draft picks, but they actually ended up making it to the Super Bowl that year. They got beat that year by the Giants. But I said all that to say this. The reason this is a big deal is because the accusation is that New England knew the playbook of their opponents. You know, and so you know, what's the big deal with that? You know, anybody that plays sports will tell you, and you know, often, you know, when I played sports, I looked for different advantages. You know, you study players, and you know, as much as I used to study it where players, you know, I was a goalie in hockey, so I'd study players' tendency on how they would shoot, you know, where they would shoot, how they would deke, and you know, you can study that all you want. But if you knew exactly what kind of plays, especially in a football game, if you knew what kind of plays the teams were going to use in certain situations, you could actually build plays just to counter those plays, and it gives you a huge advantage. Well, it's that I want to look at today, and when we're looking at some of the trials that we face in life, you know, we don't serve a God that cheats, but we do have a God that knows all of the plays and the entire playbook for those that are trying to thwart his plan, and even more specifically, he knows all the plans that the enemy will try to use to get us, his prized possession, his people, to try to get us off track so that we don't fulfill both the individual plans that he has for us and also the plans that he has to try to sidetrack God's plan overall. And so for us, as we go through trials, the first thing that we have to understand, you know, all the things that come against us, all the things that try to get us off track, we have to understand that God knows the enemy's playbook. And if we know that right from the beginning, we have to also understand that that will give us, and does give us, a distinct advantage in dealing with the things that we go through in this world. So it's one thing that we have to understand, it's this. We have an enemy that's doing everything he can to get us sidetracked, and really, he doesn't change his methods very often. As I mentioned earlier, he has a playbook, and we have a God that knows every move in that playbook. So it's with that I want to talk to you today about 4 deceptions that the enemy will use to try to keep us from fighting, or as I would often refer to keep us from fighting the good fight of faith. There is some distinct patterns and things that he does, and so we're going to go through some of those things today, and then I'm also going to show you 4 things to remember that will help you get through. In other words, 4 counterplays to the traditional methods that the enemy uses to try to get us off track. So, the first one, I'm going to go through these fairly quickly so we can get to the solutions. The first one that we have to understand as far as the deceptions that he uses, the first one I want to talk today is he tries to get you to think that winning is impossible. You can see this all through the Bible. You look at the story that we've even recently taken a look at in Daily Renewal, the idea of when Elijah went up against Jezebel. Elijah really felt that as a result of what happened on Mount Carmel, that was going to change the nation, that everything that he'd seen, all of his the fathers, all the people who went before him, all the prophets before him, all the things that they talked about, that they wanted to happen so that they could see Israel come back to God as a nation. Elijah really felt like this miracle that happened on Mount Carmel was enough to bring the nation back. And then, as we've read the story before, he met with Jezebel, and Jezebel basically put Elijah's life into a tailspin where he had lost hope. He didn't see how there was any way, if this particular situation doesn't turn the nation back, he didn't see how there was any way that the nation of Israel would ever turn back. He completely lost hope. He thought that he couldn't win. We also see with the children of Israel, they come up to the edge of the promised land. Moses sends 12 spies in, and 10 of them come back with a bad report saying, you know what? The land's exactly how God said it was, but they got caught up in seeing the size of the people that were there. They saw them as giants, and they just melted when they saw these people. They thought that there was just no hope for them to be able to go into the promise, and it brought so much doubt to them, and it got it to the point where they didn't even see themselves as going into the promise. They thought it was just a wasted trip. We can see this in the New Testament with the disciples. They had some real preconceived ideas of how when Jesus was going to take a stand and against the culture, against the Romans. They really felt that he was, yes, the Messiah, but that they thought that the Messiah was going to sit on a throne, a physical throne, and take care of all of these different people that were coming against their nation, that he was going to rule and reign here. And that is, in the time to come, we'll see that. But from the idea that they thought, the way they thought that was going to happen, it wasn't even close. And so when they found themselves in the Garden of Gethsemane, and Judas brought some soldiers with him and betrayed Jesus, all those preconceived ideas that they had were all challenged to the point where a lot of them, they fled. And, from that point, it was very hard for them to see how any of the things that they thought were going to happen. They lost hope to the point where, all the people that followed Jesus, all the people that were healed by Jesus, almost none of them were there on the day that Jesus hung on the cross. The second thing that the enemy tries to do is he tries to wear us out. And we see the warning that God gives us in the book of Galatians. In Galatians chapter 6, starting in verse 8, he says this. He says, "For he who sows to the flesh will of the flesh reap corruption. but he who sows to the Spirit will of the Spirit reap everlasting life. And let us not grow weary while doing good, for in due season we shall reap if we do not lose heart. Therefore, as we have opportunity, let us do good to all, especially to those who are of the household of faith. And we have to see here that and understand that, the idea of walking with God, the idea of seeing yourself as being an example for Christ, often this is challenged. After being a pastor for so long, I'm going to tell you honestly, I look at my life as being a life where I want to pour out my life to help people. And you don't have to be a pastor to do that. But, when you're a Christian, our priority is to cultivate our relationship with God and also help others to come into relationship with God. And so there's often times where you pour out your life to other people. And I can tell you that there's been many times where I've poured out my life to other people, and it can be frustrating. It can wear you out. Just like I'm sure, with parents, raising your kids, there's times where you just shake your head and go, man, is any of the stuff I'm trying to teach actually catching? Are they getting any of this? And, there's a frustration there. But just like a parent loving a child, we have to understand that, first of all, God, I'm sure there's times where he could be frustrated with us. We miss the mark often. But, he loves us so much. He doesn't give up on us. He continues to pour his life out for us. He continues to do whatever needs to be done in order to help us get to the final destination. And see, it's from there that we have to understand that there is a love available from God to us. As our spiritual walk develops, the fruit of the Spirit, and one of the fruit is love, is developed in us so that we don't get worn out as we continue to love people. But that being the case, again, there's a warning here. It says that we are not to grow weary while doing good. As much as there's a temptation, when you're pouring out and trying to do good, and there's often times when we're really disappointed, and often it's by other people. We have to embrace the fact that we do have an enemy that is trying to wear us out. He's setting up situations that are trying to get us to just say, you know what, I've had enough of this. And it's at those times when we get tired that we really need to be careful. And notice it says here in verse 8, it says, for he who sows to the flesh will reap of the flesh, but he who sows to the Spirit will of the Spirit reap everlasting life. One of the reasons why we have to be very careful when we start to grow weary of doing good is because if we bite into this idea that, what good has come to me for doing good. And this is one of the traps that the enemy tries to set up. Tries to tell you, really, what good has it done for you? And again, I refer to often, I've found myself in positions where I've poured out my life to people. And there's times when, and especially when you get close to somebody, the more you pour out to somebody, the more disappointed you are when they disappoint you. And the more opportunity the enemy has to potentially get you sidetracked. And so I want to challenge you with this today. When you are growing weary of well-doing, the last thing you should do is quit doing good. Often the first tendency we have is, I'm just going to do something I wouldn't normally do because it doesn't matter anyway. That would be what we refer to as sowing to the flesh. Something that is for me. Something where you're just kind of putting everything that you normally think aside and saying, I'm going to do something for me. Now, often that's the advice that people will give you. Say, you know what? You just need to focus on you a little more. Well, that can be true to a point, but also we need to be very careful that we don't become the focus. Now, when we're going to focus on you, if that focus is on working on your own spiritual walk, your relationship with Jesus, I would agree with that 100%. But when we start partaking in acts of the flesh, in other words, things that aren't necessarily, that definitely aren't pleasing to God, things that are more focused on us, we have to be very careful because these things will potentially get us to the place where we lose track of what we're actually supposed to be doing. It says here that if we sow to the Spirit, that we will of the Spirit reap everlasting life. So I want to encourage you not to grow weary in doing good. Do things that you know spiritually are going to be to an advantage long term. That brings us to the third one. This is another one of the deceptions that the enemy tries to use with us, and that's get us to be overconfident. The first one was getting us to think that it's impossible, but this one is every bit as dangerous. Overconfidence often makes us lazy spiritually. And we see this example in Revelation 4. And again, we've talked about this on Daily Renewal. In Revelation 4, it talks about the 7 churches. And one of the 7 churches, the church in Laodicea, was a church that Jesus says, he said, you say that you're rich and don't need anything, yet really you are wretched, miserable, poor, blind, and naked. And, so he said, you start thinking that you're doing better than you're doing, and really, he looked at them and said, you're really a lukewarm church. You're not really doing anything. And we need to be very careful that we don't do, as it says in 1 Corinthians 10:12, it says that let him who thinks he stands take heed lest he fall. It's at the times when we think we got everything figured out that we need to be very careful. The enemy often will let us think that we got everything under control. But it's at that point that we have to be very careful. We have to be those that are relying on Jesus. Be those that are on constant lookout. When you think everything is going just perfect and you got everything figured out, these are the times where you could be susceptible to deception. Now, the fourth deception that we see in the enemy's playbook, we can find all through the Old and New Testament. But one of the stories that I really feel exemplifies the idea of being distracted is the story we see in 2 Kings 11. And here's David, one of the greatest heroes of the Bible. It says here in chapter 11, verse 1, it says, "It happened in the spring of the year at the time when kings go out to battle, that David sent Joab and his servants with him and all Israel, and they destroyed the people of Ammon and besieged Rabbah. But David remained in Jerusalem." Now, this is a time when the kings were the time of the year where kings go out to battle. In other words, this is a time where David was supposed to be at a certain place at a certain time. He knew he was supposed to be there. And yet, as a result of different things going on in his head, he found himself in a place where he wasn't supposed to be. And let's take a look at what happens next. It says, "When it happened one evening, that David arose from his bed and walked on the roof of the king's house. And from the roof he saw a woman bathing, and the woman was very beautiful to behold." And if we go on from this story, we see here that this woman's name is Bathsheba. And this is an amazing story if you haven't read it. It's a story where David got absolutely sidetracked in many areas of his life because he ended up having an affair with a married woman. And where did this all start? It started by David not going and being in the place where he knew he was supposed to be at the time he was supposed to be, and it opened up the door for him to be distracted by the enemy, and this caused some major turmoil in his life. When I look at modern Christianity, there's a lot of things that are going on even right now that I believe, when I look at all 4 of these deceptions, this one here is something that I think we really need to look at right now. And I'll tell you why. I see lots of things going on in Christianity today that are all just slight variations just to get us off track of where we should be looking enough that I think there's a lot of times where we could really end up in trouble. I talked a little bit last week about Peter in the Garden of Gethsemane, how he bowed to temptation, and as a result, he ended up trying to fight a spiritual battle in the natural. He got distracted. And he got distracted by his own ideas, and as a result, he ended up, when they were going to take Jesus, he ended up fleeing away from him. And caused a lot of problems in his life. And, when I look at some of the things that are happening in Christianity right now, there's a lot of different causes that we're taking up that, again, as I warned last episode, we need to be very careful that we don't just take up a cause and really get our eyes off the real cause. And that is, and let me put it in a different form. We can get caught up in a lot of things that are fighting for Jesus and fighting for the cause of Jesus, but if you lose your relationship with Jesus or your focus on your relationship with Jesus while doing that, then your cause really isn't worth it. There's many times where we get caught up in these things. And, I even look at one of the things that I've warned people about many times, and I've seen this, and I think this is a potential issue that we need to look at once in a while. And that's something as important as physical healing. Now, I'm a guy that I believe in physical healing. I believe that is for today. But, I've seen many people that have made their physical healing such a focus that I often have questioned, if seeking that physical healing has been something that is more important to them or too much of a focus to the point where it's affected their personal walk with God. And there's another story in the Bible that the pool of Bethesda. I want you to think about this for a moment. Here's these guys, these people that all have these different ailments, and they really believe that every once in a while an angel would come down and stir the waters, and the first one to get into the pool would be healed. And, after studying this out, I really question whether this was actually an angel of the Lord. And here's why. Jesus goes to that particular pool, and he sees a man there, and he heals that man. And that man had spent day after day after day being brought out to that pool and just hoping that the angel would show up. And when the angel began to stir the water, he talked about the fact that, he has nobody to put him into the pool, when the angel does stir the water. So he goes there day after day hoping somehow he can make it into that pool in time so that he could win this Vegas style healing that apparently God is going to give up every once in a while, to whoever gets in the pool first. That doesn't line up with the way that God does things. I have to remind you that if we go back in Scripture, that there was actually a third of the angels that decided to follow Satan when Satan fell. When Satan betrayed God, there was a third of the angels that actually followed him. And when I look at that, this is just my opinion on this, but could it be that there's an actual that's angels that I could picture Satan messing with people's heads more than I could see with God. I can't see God setting up a system like that where he'd just be looking down from heaven and going, I want to send an angel stir the waters and I'm just going to give one guy healing today. That just doesn't seem to be God's MO. And when I look at the idea of healing now, back to then, think about this guy. Every day, his focus would have been on healing. And, I know many people, including myself, that, I gone through different situations where I was seeking God for healing. I was getting all the healing scriptures, doing all the things that I was apparently supposed to do, getting the word into my eyes, getting it into my ears so it gets to my heart. I was speaking forth the word. And, as much as I believe in all those things, I also believe that it can be used as a smokescreen to try to get us off track from what God really wants us to do. And it's God's priority for us to have a close relationship with Him. In other words, to seek God's heart, not just seek His hand. And what I mean when I say His hand, what He can do. More as much as Jesus enjoyed, He had compassion on people and He healed them. More importantly than all the healing He ever did, the physical healing He ever did in the Bible, He wanted to see people restored so that they could spend eternity with Him. And so we have to be very careful that we don't get caught up on things that could be used by the enemy to be a distraction to keep us from ultimately what is God's best for us. So before we get into 4 different things to remember that are going to help us get through some of these deceptions the enemy has, I just want you to remember the playbook. Often these are the things that that the enemy will try to get you to bite into. If you feel like there's just no hope, I know many people that they've given up on Jesus because they feel like they're not good enough. They feel like they've blown it with God and can't get back. Well, that is one of the deceptions. The idea of there's no way to come back. I can't win. No, that's a deception. We're going to show you just in a few moments some things you're going to be able to do to get through that. Maybe you're worn out. If you're getting worn out to the point where you just don't feel like doing it anymore, that's one of the key deceptions he uses. Again, one of the other ones, overconfident. You're not even checking to see anymore, where things are at. You feel like you got this. If you're at the point where you're not relying on Jesus in your walk right now, you become complacent. Be careful, because it could be a setup. And the 4th one, don't get caught in being distracted from the real task at hand. And that is continually cultivating your relationship with Jesus, allowing the Holy Spirit to bring transformation to your life. If you're not moving ahead in your walk with God, if you're not consistently being transformed, then you need to be very careful. Don't get caught up in causes. Now, should we have a cause? Absolutely. But that cause should not be in front of you analyzing your life and asking if you're continually walking forward in your walk with God. So, that brings me, again, to 4 things that I want to talk to you about that you need to remember that are going to help you get through so that you will not bow to these deceptions. The first one we see here in John, the book of John, chapter 8, starting in verse 31. Jesus says this. He says, "If you abide in my word, you are my disciples indeed. And you shall know the truth, and the truth shall make you free." The first thing that you have to remember is that God has a playbook, and that is the Word of God. We've been given the Word of God, or the Word of truth. And so when we look at this, notice he says this. He says, "If you abide in my word." Now, abiding in his word is a lot more than just saying, yeah, I prayed a prayer. I accepted Jesus into my heart when I was 10. And from there, I went to church and I did what my pastor said. And if you even got more exuberant, you amened his sermons and you got involved with some form of ministry. No, that's not what Jesus said here. What Jesus said is, if you abide in my word, you are my disciples indeed, and you shall know the truth, and the truth shall make you free. Now, the key here is when we're going through deception, or times where there's potential deception, we've got the enemy coming against us. We're going through trials. The key here is to get to the point where we have peace in all situations. And notice here, it says that the key to walking with God is knowing the truth, and the key to getting that peace is if we know the truth will make us free. And that freedom and peace, they coincide with one another. If you're truly free, you're going to have peace. So let's take a look. It says, if you abide in my word, one of the key things that we have to remember is that God has given us His Word. And let me clarify this. We can trust His Word. Now, there's some real bad translations of the Bible. I love the King James Version, but as you can tell with Daily Renewal, I often use the New King James Version. But for me who studies the Bible, if there's portions of the scripture that I'm not sure of, I can actually get what's called a Strong's Concordance, and I can go back and look at the original words, the way they were written, because it wasn't written in English. So I can go back and look at all those. But I'm going to tell you this, that for all of us, we have to understand, and I've done videos on this before, we can trust the Bible. The Bible is actually 66 books that are all written by different people at different time periods, and they come together. And the thing that's amazing about it is there's many people that have tried to come against it over the years and try to say, oh, there's contradictions. Well, the amazing part about it is there is actually no contradictions in this book. It had to be supernaturally put together by God. I've even got on my phone an app of 101 contradictions of the Bible debunked. All those people that say that there's contradictions in the Bible, they're not contradictions that take away from the authenticity of this book. And here's the interesting thing. Even in these last days, I've even got, I know people that say, well, I've heard that there's different books of the Bible that weren't included and all this other stuff. Well, here's the comfort that you can have. This particular book of 66 books put together have stood the test of time. And again, for them to have no contradictions when there's been so many writers over so much time, we can have confidence that this book is the words of God written amongst the pages. Now, there's other books in other religions that say, well, this was also books of God. And often, I'll give you an example. In some Bibles from a different religion, they say that these books called the Apocrypha. The reason why they were actually never included in the canon of the Bible is because in those particular ones, they were stories, but in those particular stories, there were contradictions with the rest of the books that were looked at as being authentic. Therefore, they're stories, but they can't be looked at as being what's called inspired by God. I've heard people talk about the fact that, there's other books that were left out of the Bible and there's other inspired writings by God. Well, the test for that would be, if those writings were inspired, do they contradict anything that is written in the current texts that we have? If they do contradict in any way, then we have to throw them out. So anything that would be looked at as being inspired wouldn't contradict what we have anyway. And from there's other arguments I could easily bring up that we could look at, such as if they were inspired by God, do we not have a God that's big enough that He would have made sure that they were included? It's like God's up there going, well, I'm going to give them my word so that they can follow it wholeheartedly, and then all of a sudden, 200 or even 1,000 years later, He's going to go, man, I wish I'd have added that other book. Maybe I'll do that now. That doesn't make any sense. When we've got things that try to sidetrack us from what we know is the truth, and there's some that say, well, that could have been, some of the writers could have, been swayed. They could have written things wrongly. When we start getting into tangents like that and not trusting that God has full capabilities to make sure that what we're reading here is His Word, and it's not only stood the proof of seeing lives transformed, but also the proof of the test of time. There's so many other things we can look at. There's been archaeological evidences that have been unearthed that prove the New Testament, that prove the Old Testament. I mean, we have to be sure that we don't get off on tangents even when it comes to the Bible. Because from there, we have to understand that the enemy would also try to even do that to people, to try to get them not to trust in what has always been considered the Word of God. If we find that the Word of God is not reliable, then there's a lot of other things that will begin to unravel. But that's why you can wholeheartedly have faith to believe that that the Bible that we have, again, we can go back to the Greek, we can go back to the Hebrew, if you really want to get back to a lot of the words meanings, but we have to trust that there is good translations of the Bible that are trustworthy. And not only that, God will get you the word that you need to hear. If you are abiding in what He's given us to study about Him, it's the Holy Spirit who reveals. And I'll give you a great example of that. I know a friend of mine that he's read the Bible cover to cover every year since he was, I think he said 16. And he's got to be in his 80s now. I haven't talked to him in a few years because he's living far away from me. And he says, Lyle, he says, evidence of the Bible being a spiritual book. He says, I have read it through cover to cover. He says, every year I see things in that book that I've never seen before. Understand that this is not just words on a page, but God uses this to reveal Himself, and He's chosen to use this to reveal Himself for over 2,000 years. So we can have faith that if we abide in His Word, He will reveal Himself, and that truth, the truth of His Word, will bring us to the place of peace, or as we like to refer to, as freedom. Now, the second thing that we need to remember is that we can't quit fighting. Paul wrote to Timothy, and I often refer to this. He encourages him not to quit fighting the good fight of faith. We have to understand that as long as we keep getting up, as long as we keep putting on the armor every day, as long as we keep continuing to battle, there will be a day where our race will be finished. But how we run the race is really important. And Paul talks about this in his first letter to the church in Corinth. And he says this in 1 Corinthians chapter 9, starting in verse 24. He says, do you not know that those who run in a race all run, but one receives the prize? Run in such a way that you may obtain it. And everyone who competes for the prize is temperate in all things. Now, they do it to obtain a perishable crown, but we for an imperishable crown. Therefore I run thus, not with uncertainty, thus I fight, not as one who beats the air, but I discipline my body and bring it into subjection, lest when I have preached to others, I myself should be disqualified. Now he says that we need to look at this as in verse 25. It says, everyone who competes for the prize is temperate. That word temperate is talking about self-control. That's another word you can use for that. So for us, we have to realize that this whole life that we're leading is like a race. Don't give up halfway through the race and expect to finish it. We have to run this race in such a way that we see that there is a finish line. And as long as you keep running the race, as long as you keep making the decision to get up and keep running, to keep fighting, then there will be an end to it, and it'll be a good end. You will cross the finish line, and God will make a way for you to get there. He's not going to allow things to be in front of you that are going to take you out of the race. Again, as we mentioned, God knows the enemy's playbook, and there is no weapon formed against you that'll prosper as long as you stay close to Him. That brings me to the third thing that we need to be in remembrance of, and it's this. The fact that you got to remember, or we have to remember what Jesus did, and also what others are doing and what others have done. Now, and I'll explain this a little bit. Let's turn to Hebrews 12. Hebrews 12, starting in verse 1, it says this. It says, therefore, we also, since we are surrounded by so great a cloud of witnesses, let us lay aside every weight and the sin which so easily ensnares us, and let us run with endurance. Again, looking at this idea of the race that we're running, it says, the race that is set before us, looking unto Jesus, the author and finisher of our faith, who for the joy that was set before him endured the cross, despising the shame, and has sat down at the right hand of the throne of God. Now, the first thing I want to point out here is the fact that Jesus ran his race and he went through all different temptations. There was no temptation that he wasn't able to get through, and yet without sin. Jesus was able to pass the greatest temptation, and that was giving up his life so that we could be reconciled to God by dying on the cross. And it says here that we are to look unto Jesus, the author and finisher of our faith. Now, that right there is one of the indicators that when we look at our life, we have to understand that it's God, it's Jesus who sees everything in our life before we were in our mother's womb, but also from when we were born till our last breath, and then from on into eternity. We have to understand that it's God who sees everything in our life and is directing everything in our life. The enemy does try to put roadblocks and tries to get us off track, but even those things, the things that God allows, he is able to use even what the enemy tries to use to destroy us, and he's able to turn those things for good. And we see that in Romans 8:28. How all things work toward the good for those who love God and are called according to his purpose. Even some of the things that you might look at as being some of the most drastic, terrible things that have happened in your life, even though they might have been orchestrated by God. And even when we look at some of the things we're going through right now in 2021, people complaining about how bad things are. We have to understand that none of these things have caught God off guard. But in all those things, if God is allowing them, we should always be able to have a spiritual eye and a spiritual ear to hear what God is saying. What is it, Lord, if you're allowing this to happen? Why? What can I learn out of this? What is something that is going to contribute to the story, in my case, the story of Lyle, what you're trying to do in my life? When I look at him being the author and the finisher, what part of the story is involved here? And what do I need to learn? So we see he's the author and finisher, that he endured, so he was the example. But then we also look here, at the beginning of this, it talks about that we're surrounded by a great cloud of witnesses. And because of this great cloud of witnesses, it says this should encourage us to lay aside every weight and the sin which so easily ensnare us, and run with endurance the race that's set before us. Now, I want to talk about this for a moment. There's been many people through history that have died for their faith. Some of them died what many would consider a horrible death, but they didn't renounce Jesus. They kept the faith until the end. There's many that kept the faith and maybe died of old age. Whatever you want to choose, there's people that have died and gone on before us that have run their race to completion. Now that's one group. That's a great cloud of witnesses. And I really believe that this also kind of refers to the fact that, that a lot of those people that have gone before us, they're watching us now. They want, their stories are, they hope that their stories would encourage us to finish our race. But also, there is a great cloud of witnesses right now that are possibly observing your life, that are looking and they need to see how a believer goes through things. And also, there's another group that are going things just like you are going through. They're fighting the same type of battles you are. In other words, you are not alone. It is really important that you stand firm in your faith and you continue to fight the good fight of faith. You continue to stand as some of these things come at you, and you continue to focus on Jesus. We have to remember that he paid the ultimate price for us so that we could truly live free and with him in eternity. Keep this in mind as you go through some of the things that you go through. Don't get focused on you, my friend. Focus on him. Focus on those that have made it through, and focus on those that are also fighting that battle as well, and the example that you may be setting by you staying close to Jesus. This brings me to my fourth and final point of things that we need to really be in remembrance of in order to get through some of the deceptions that the enemy will try to use to take us out. And that is this. You've got to do what you can, but rely on Jesus. Now, what do I mean by that? Well, when we take a look at Matthew 19, in verse 26, Jesus says this, "With men, this is impossible, but with God, all things are possible. We have to always remember that the God we serve can do the impossible. You know, I spoke to a friend this week that was going through some really hard times. And I said to her, I said, look, it comes down to this. You do what you can. You know, and that doesn't mean rely on your own strength. But with overwhelming circumstances, maybe 2021 is just there's stuff coming at you, whether it's, you know, job, finances, sickness, whatever it is. Oftentimes, the enemy is going to try to overwhelm you so that, again, he can perform one of these 4 deceptions that I've been talking about. We have to remember this, that basically, do what you can. If you're overwhelmed and there's something you can do, then do what you can. Pick one thing and do it. But often what happens is we get overwhelmed with our head thinking about all the things that we have no control over. You know, if there's things that you can pick away at as far as make that list a little shorter of things that are overwhelming, do that. But ultimately, we've got to get to the place where we rely upon Jesus. He is the one that will get you through the way you are supposed to get through. Worrying about it is not going to do anything for you. Focus on what you can control or what you can do and rely on Him for the rest. Trust that God knows what He's doing. He loves you enough that He will get you through. But that right there is going to take some faith, my friend. But that also is something that God is willing to build in you and is probably working on you right now. Rely on Jesus. Don't lean on your own understanding, but rely upon Him, and He will get you to the place where you will reach the finish line and you will experience the freedom that He has desired for you to experience. Well, I hope you got something out of that today. If you did, I just want to encourage you once again to consider becoming a subscriber to our channel. Also, please share these videos. If you think that they are going to be encouraging to somebody, it does help us reach more people if you share these videos with other people. Also, hitting the like button, all those things, that does help as well. But sharing the videos is probably the thing that helps us the most because that's why we do these videos. In these times, we really want to help people. So once again, I really enjoyed our session today. But until next time, God bless you and have a great day.